It's 4:20 somewhere, and right now that somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to the second annual Clips episode of the Cannabis Show. Every year we like to look back at some of our most important, favorite, and of course the silliest stories from the past 12 months. And today, Aleta, Alicia, and I are going to do just that as we review 2016. And speaking of Aleta, here she is.
Hey everybody, I'm Aleta Labak and I help keep things humming on the site as digital producer.
And our brand new interim editor-in-chief.
Yes, I'm taking over for Ricardo Baca, who has gone on to pursue some other business opportunities. We're really excited for him.
We really are.
But anyway, thanks for joining us on the Cannabis Show, where we talk about all things weed.
That's hashtag all things weed.
The serious stuff and the weird things as well. In fact, if you log on to thecannabis.co right now, you will see stories about actor Andrew Garfield's idea of heaven.
Spoiler alert, it involves pot brownies and the happiest place on earth.
There were some jokesters in California reviving a 1976 prank.
La La Land has itself a new moniker, y'all.
And then two top-level Colorado marijuana regulators have just made a leap into the cannabis consulting business.
Yeah, Aleta, newly legalized states have lots of regulations to figure out, so this one is huge.
So, how are you, Vince?
You know, it's been a long couple of days, couple of weeks for us here at the Cannabis, but 2017 started out pretty awesome. There's snow in Denver. I adore snow. Less than 8 weeks until my brand new baby's here. I adore my brand new baby. I watched all of the Star Wars prequels for some reason over the weekend. They were just as bad as I remembered them being. Life's pretty good right now. How about you, Aleta?
Wow, you keep it busy.
For a guy who sits on the couch a lot, I do, yeah.
I've been good. It's been a kind of a tumultuous past week, saying goodbye to Ricardo, but
it's very true.
We're definitely, we've got some good plans in store for upcoming year.
I can't wait to get into the last year, but let's take a look at, or to next year, but let's take a look at the last year.
Yeah, let's see, it's going to be exciting to dive deep into the big stories of 2016. But before we get into the past events, let's take a look at current events with a quick Week in Weed.
Oh, hell yeah, the Week in Weed. We should do that. Let's get it started, and let's start right in Washington, D.C., where marijuana legalization backers plan on being very visible during President Donald Trump's inauguration this month.
That's right. Really holding true to that 420 somewhere ideal, activists and advocates will distribute 4,200 joints starting at 8 a.m. on January 20th on the west side of the landmark DuPont Circle. The plan is to have partaking participants walk to the National Mall. Partaking participants is fun to say.
This was organized by the pro-marijuana organization DCMJ, and the giveaway is 100% legal in the 420-friendly District of Columbia, with some tough caveats. Like, if anyone lighting up on federal land, they could absolutely be arrested because cannabis does remain illegal under federal law.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
There's a lot of federal land in D.C.
People are demonstrating because many advocates are worried about what will happen with state legalization under a potential Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions.
And you know what, Aleta? Clips of people far more informed than us are discussing Senator Sessions, and they are available in the Cannabis Show archive, so go ahead and check them out, and everybody, we're probably going to play one on this show later, so let's move on in the Week of Weed to my favorite state of Florida next.
Florida's Medical Marijuana Amendment 2 went into effect just this past January 3rd, and Floridians are starting to foresee a storm approaching as the state expands from its limited program of low-THC, non-smokable cannabis.
And Dr. Joseph Dorn, one of the few people who worked in medical cannabis in the state before Amendment 2's passage, says that people need to be patient. Quote, "I think the expectations for most people is it's going to be a free-for-all. I think there's going to be a lot of chaos initially because there is still a lot of work to be done," end quote.
One of the most significant changes in the new program is the expanded list of qualifying conditions. That includes patients suffering from HIV or AIDS, PTSD, ALS, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis could now get access to medical marijuana.
And to get a card, patients must be under the care of a licensed physician for at least 3 months. And that doctor needs to have completed the required 8-hour course and examination to certify patients. Currently in Florida, there are 340 registered physicians for distributing medical cards and just shy of 1,500 patients in the state registry. The patients are expected to steadily increase, at least in my expectations, of course.
Yeah, everyone's expecting that. The means of delivery are up in the air, with opponents to the amendment insisting lawmakers uphold the rules, asking for laws to be put in place banning infused candy.
Infused candy. Let's go ahead and move the week in weed to a place with lots and lots of bountiful infused candy. Colorado, and specifically, Aspen.
Even more specifically, the original Leaf. It's a recreational dispensary visited by ski bums and tourists alike. And that includes pop sensation Mariah Carey.
Ooh.
According to the UK's Daily Mail, Mariah wore the mandatory pot shop uniform of a green ball gown and sunglasses while she was wandering in and out of the store with her crew during an evening outing over the holidays.
You know, I keep hearing about this ball gown and I haven't seen a picture yet. Somebody, at Vinny Chant on Twitter, send me a picture of Mariah walking anywhere near this place in this wonderful ball gown. More importantly, no one knows if Mariah or her entourage purchased anything at the shop, but that doesn't have to be the story here. The best-selling recording artist of the 90s, according to the WMAs, is curious about commercial cannabis, and that is significant, y'all.
Indeed, producer Vince. Now that we're caught up on the new news, it's time for us to turn to the events of the past year and dig into our Cannabist clip show. Let's start with Alicia Wallace's look at the cannabis cultural shift of 2016.
2016 showed that, to a majority of Americans, marijuana legalization is not a punchline nor a pipe dream. Public support of legalization reached historic levels, according to national polls conducted by Pew Research and Gallup. The degree of support correlated with demographics. Millennials favor legalization more than any other group, at about 71%, according to Pew. Gen X and the baby boomers' support hovered in the mid-50% range, while the silent generation, folks 71 to 88 years old, remained opposed with only 33% support. Also notable in the cannabis cultural shift were new studies that showed that while teen use has remained flat in the legal era, older adults are increasingly consuming marijuana. The growing acceptance has played out in other means. More states are adopting marijuana regulations, and more big businesses are honing in on this sector.
Big business is definitely starting to take notice of the opportunities. For example, Scott's Miracle-Gro, which became the majority owner of Boulder's AeroGrow International. AeroGrow is an indoor gardening company that was also Scott's first dip into hydroponics.
But that's not the only sign of corporate America's acceptance of marijuana in the last year. Innovative Industrial Properties became the first cannabis company on a major U.S. stock exchange, in this case the NYSE. And there have been some other eye-catching moves coming out of the marijuana industry in 2016.
Like Open Vape. It's one of the largest legal cannabis companies in the world, and they really pushed the normalization envelope when they made a bid to secure the naming rights of the Denver Broncos' home at Mile High. And that happened after the bankruptcy of Sports Authority last March. Open Vape's attorney, Sean McAllister, was on the show to talk about it.
Today, I got an email from one of your clients.
Oh, that's right. Breaking news, yeah.
Open Vape, a massive, probably one of the largest cannabis companies in Colorado, without a doubt, right?
The largest vaporizer and one of the largest edible companies in the country, absolutely.
So they're selling in 9 states, Jamaica.
International presence, yeah.
So they just told me that they are making a play for the naming rights of Mile High Stadium, which, for anybody who doesn't live here, it's where the Denver Broncos play. And, of course, we had a big... I don't know if it was an April Fool's joke because the dispensary swears that it wasn't, but a dispensary group locally on April 1 told us, hey, we're going to buy the naming rights for Mile High, and we made some calls and still don't quite know if that was serious or not.
It was an April Fool's joke, yeah.
Open Vape making the play. Of course, the previous existing company that had those naming rights, Sports Authority, is going through a very sad bankruptcy, but you represent Open Vape. So tell us what the plans are. Where are you at? What's going on?
Well, yeah, that Native Roots announcement was an April Fool's joke, but the Open Vape announcement to have the naming rights, Open Vape Field at Mile High, is a very serious proposal. A company with $100 million a year in revenue or more is clearly in a position to pay the $6 or $8 million a year it's going to cost to own those naming rights. And what would be more perfect than open vape at Mile High? You can be a mile high at Mile High. And what better represents the city of Denver than one of our most successful businesses that employs thousands of people, hundreds or thousands of people. So, I mean, look, where it's at right now is that the whole case is in bankruptcy court.
Sure.
But what I can say at this point is that Open Vape has sent a letter to the Denver Broncos, the Municipal Stadium Authority, and Sports Authority, and in the context of the bankruptcy proceeding, asking to buy those naming rights. And of course, you saw the news today that the Denver Broncos said, well, no one can sell that without our permission. But this is really caught up in bankruptcy court, and it depends on what Sports Authority says, because they have a role in deciding who gets to buy these rights, and they may try to keep them or spin them off, or and the bankruptcy trustee has a role. So all we can say right now is that Open Vape is serious about this, and they're ready to pay the money to have those naming rights. And I think it would be a great success for the city of Denver, because that represents that. Look at how marijuana has been successful, and look at the success story of Denver. And look at the success story of this company that's nationwide.
It's fascinating. I mean, the fact that this conversation is even happening is so interesting. But tell me this, because I was working with my colleague Alicia on April 1st, looking into would the NFL even allow that to happen? And we just did a very cursory look around the league, and it doesn't seem like they have any alcohol sponsors, no Bud Light, Field, or Coors or something like Major League Baseball does. But so tell me, do you even know if this is possible?
Well, the important thing to actually remember about the company Open Vape is that it is not directly in the business of selling marijuana. Open Vape licenses the name and it produces the product, but the vaporizer pen itself. But then it sells that to wholesalers who infuse it with the marijuana. So actually, Open Vape is not strictly or technically a marijuana company.
That's getting some pretty
that's getting down
technicalities,
there in the weeds.
But I see what you're saying.
They are a manufacturer of vaporizer pens, and you know, the thing about the NFL is, first of all, they have kind of stuck their head in the sand on this issue, but it does seem like more and more players are coming out saying that the NFL needs to change its policy. I know, for example, that the league is very lax on its testing. It sort of announces the marijuana testing date in advance, and as long as people don't smoke within the few weeks of that test, that they're sort of
sometimes
tacitly,
they do. Sometimes they,
unless they're tweeting about it the day before, right?
Well, that, or if people are in habitual trouble, they might get a random test. But you know, I think in practice the NFL is trying to walk both sides of the path here, and it really is wrapped up in federal legality, and hopefully we can continue to pressure Congress and make this, you know, legal if it's legal at the state level, and then companies like the NFL will not have such an issue. But I think they've been slow to come around. I mean, you know, players need to be able to use a medicine that's safer than alcohol and doesn't addict them like get them addicted like opiates, and the NFL, I think, is going to see that wisdom, and hopefully eventually we'll have a real free market and the naming rights. Imagine that.
Imagine
only in
that.
marijuana.
Oh my God! If that ends up happening, I mean, me and Vince are always talking about the Broncos on the show. We're big fans, and if that ends up happening, that would be a monumental shift.
You know, the National Football League was very much a running theme on the Cannabis Show in 2016. Former and current players alike have banded together to try and push the NFL to acknowledge the medical benefits of marijuana and to have it removed from their banned substance list.
That's right. Former offensive tackle Eugene Monroe, who retired in 2016 after 7 seasons in the NFL, has written multiple columns for the Cannabist on this exact topic. He also spoke live at the 2nd annual Cannabist Awards in Las Vegas this past November, having an open conversation about cannabinoids as an effective pain management tool.
The Denver Post's Nikki Javla, who covers the Broncos and the NFL, also covered this story from top to bottom, and we brought her on the show to ask her, will the NFL ever come around and change its cannabis policies?
We're talking NFL and CBD, so Christian and Nikki afterward. Do you think, I mean, the NFL just reconsidered its stance on THC, the allowable limits of nanograms in a bloodstream, and I believe that was 2015, but do you think they're going to get more real about THC and CBD, and if so, when?
Hopefully soon. I think they have to. and hopefully soon. I remember when it was 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, there was an op-ed that one of my colleagues wrote in the Washington Post that was reprinted in the Denver Post about THC and CBD. And Steve Fox, and he was talking about the fact that there's also the neuroprotectant element potentially there. It's something that has been researched, is being researched, and if you put aside just the chronic pain issues that NFL players experience, opiate addiction, and opiate intolerance, so like people that just can't take opiates because they have a bad reaction to them. If I'm not mistaken, Rick Upchurch or some of those guys were talking about that too. They have to revisit this. I think the NFL, particularly on the concussion issue and some of these things, they have to take a very serious look at it, because they have an existential issue going on with the healthcare issues that are faced by their players after they retire.
And Nikki, you've been studying this for months. What's your take on this? Do you think this is an issue that NFL is taking seriously?
I think they're going to have to eventually. I think these CBD studies, and the more people talk about it, the more stories are being written, the more active players are coming out in support of that. And when you get the active players speaking out, then the owners are going to have to support them because they're paying them and they need them. This is their product. And I think the league is going to have to listen. I think it's going to start with CBD because it's a little more innocuous without the THC. But I think they're going to have to listen soon.
And to Christian's point, I mean, the concussions, isn't that a part of your research as well? I mean, is that what Plummer and some of these other players and ex-players are out there trying to raise money to do the research for?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now they're just trying to collect data and kind of get it in the hands of the researchers at Johns Hopkins. But the ultimate goal is to see if this helps with CTE. And part 2 of this series that we're doing on NFL and pain management kind of looks at a guy who's dealing with these issues now, a former Bronco that some people may know, and kind of explaining what he goes through. And he also uses CBD, and it's helped him.
And remind us, CTE?
CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Oh, yes, okay.
Just rolls off the tongue.
Of course.
It'd be a shame if the league chose the PR issue that they think they have with marijuana use, and you know how that looks as far as perception over the health of the players, and that's one of the big pushbacks. You know, I know a lot of people are talking about, you know, you can watch however many alcohol commercials during the Super Bowl or everything else, you know, and we're actually talking about medicine here. So, you know, they got to overcome it. Hopefully their PR people are smart enough to realize this is a very critical decision for them.
2016 also brought legal access to marijuana in some form or another to more than half the country after 8 states passed marijuana ballot measures. It was a long presidential election year.
Long presidential election year. So let's just go ahead and let Alicia wrap up election year 2016 for us.
It was hailed as a watershed moment for cannabis in America. And, for the most part, election 2016 delivered on those expectations. 9 states voted on legalization measures. Arkansas, Florida, Montana, and North Dakota weighed medical marijuana measures. And we saw Arizona, California, Massachusetts, Maine, and Nevada vote whether to make recreational use legal. With the exception of Arizona, voters said yes to cannabis at the ballot box. Eyes were on California and what it would mean if one of the world's largest economies okayed adult use regulations. But as the number of recreational states doubled and medical marijuana states grew to more than half the U.S., that roaring optimism for a ripple effect of federal legalization was tempered with the election of Donald Trump as president. Although Trump has expressed support for states' rights and said he wouldn't interfere with legal recreational states like Colorado, industry members' blood pressure rose with the nomination of Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. Sessions has adamantly opposed adult use legalization and stated publicly that he thinks people who smoke pot are, quote, not good people.
You know, we've talked Sessions' good people, quote, into the ground on this show since he was announced as President-elect Donald Trump's Attorney General nominee, and I'm still not over it, man.
I hear ya. It has raised a lot of hackles, no doubt. We had some help on the show this year analyzing the marijuana industry post-Election Day 2016. The National Cannabis Industry Association's Taylor West and law firm Vicente Cederberg's Brian Vicente joined Ricardo Baca to break down the big issues.
Election 2016, thank God we were on the other side of it. You know, was this a net win or a net loss for the legalization movement. Taylor?
I think it's unquestionably a net win. Just purely on numbers, you're talking about 8 out of 9 states that passed it. But beyond that, you really are looking at a tipping point here. We now have more than 60% of the population of the U.S. living in a state that will have a regulated marijuana program, whether it's medical or adult use. You've got almost 25% of the country living in a state that will have adult use legalization. You, in an election that otherwise seemed to skew quite conservative, you saw these marijuana initiatives passing with substantial margins. I think also, you know, the initiative in Pueblo that you talked about earlier in the show is very important from a symbolic standpoint, in addition to it being extremely important to Pueblo's economy. This idea that there might be buyer's remorse was just completely rejected by that. You know, the prohibitionist movement was attempting sort of a test case there to see if they could convince people that legalization had been the wrong idea and they should roll it back. And instead, that was voted down by double digits. So I think what we're seeing here, regardless of the rest of the election, is that there is a mandate in this country now for marijuana policy reform, and it cannot be ignored. This election just cemented that, and that's why I see it as a absolutely a net win.
A net win, and it's worth noting that Pueblo voted to keep its recreational businesses, and in the midterms 2 years ago, Manitou Springs, a much smaller community in Colorado, but again, some prohibitionists came in, challenged it, and they voted to keep their recreational community there. Brian, net win, net loss?
I think it's a net win for sure. I mean, all these states coming on board, particularly with California legalizing, Massachusetts legalizing, Florida, you know, such a populous state, bring on medical. And again, I think, you know, there's two big stories. One is Trump and one is marijuana. And you know, you look at those Trump voters. I mean, some of them are xenophobes, some of them are racist, but some of them aren't, right? Some of them are people that want change. And honestly, a lot of those people also voted for marijuana reform, you know. And so I think if you know, moving forward, we have to try to be positive. We have to try to clap, you know, sort of grab onto that and figure out how we can ride that wave forward, where marijuana laws continue to change, and ultimately prohibition is just a relic of the past.
You know, we saw this coming. Of course, the three of us, we knew that cannabis was going to be a significant issue last night, regardless of how these state initiatives went down. But it's exciting to be on the other side, and to see that this narrative is really continuing from 2014 with what we did here in Colorado and the midterms with Oregon and Alaska and excitement in DC, and now here we are. Wow.
There was plenty of national marijuana news to go around in 2016, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the notable changes in the first state. Legalization trailblazer Colorado continued to adapt on the fly to a rapidly changing new industry by adopting some new regulations. Trying to address concerns about kids accidentally ingesting edibles, state legislators passed a bill to ban marijuana gummies in the shapes of fruits and animals. Medical and recreational edibles were the focus of another rule that took effect in October. Now edibles must be stamped with a universal symbol, a diamond shape with the letters THC and an exclamation point, to indicate that they contain marijuana. That change was part of a bundle of new rules that included banning the words candies or candy in marijuana products. Regulators also created an equivalency guide for recreational cannabis purchases that defines just how many grams of concentrates or servings of edibles are equal to an ounce of flour.
And now that we're back in Colorado, thanks to Alicia, I'm staying here because we also saw some very serious reinvestment back into the industry to improve user experience for recreational consumers.
Totally. In the early days of medical marijuana here, dispensaries had a pop-up feeling. But that's because federal raids could cost an owner everything, and who knew when that might happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, the ability to move quickly to set up shop was a staple in the aesthetic for a long time.
And then 2016 happened, and the first ever $1 million pot shop.
As Vince and I were talking earlier about my story from last week, some of these marijuana shops are investing $1 million+ into individual retail locations all over the U.S. And this isn't limited to pot shops either. It's, you know, it's the packaging of edibles and concentrates. It's, you know, the way hemp businesses are presenting themselves. So, you know, there's a new hemp spa in Longmont that I just did a freelance story about. That's fascinating. Everything in there is hemp, including the tea that you're greeted with when you walk through the door, the seeds on the counter, as well as the CBD infused oil they're using. But Morris, are you seeing this in your experiences in hemp and cannabis?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, now that it's becoming more mainstream, you know, you want to provide a shopping environment that people enjoy. And, you know, you look at where things were 5-6 years ago on the medical side, and you walk into a medical dispensary, it's really pretty a hole in the wall, a lot of it. Some people, you know, had nice shops. And coming from the music industry, if you look at it from your Twist and Shouts to your Tower Records to your Virgin Records, you know, Virgin had a beautiful store here. You know, the aesthetics in those stores, you know, it's there to, you know, entice people. Wow, this is great, I'm gonna buy.
Well, and that's a great perspective, because ultimately it's this newly legal industry mirroring that of traditional industry, right? And they're like, oh, maybe if we abide by these principles of good-looking retail design, then customers will spend more time here, and they'll want to come back, and they'll spend more money. This is what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. Well, and you look at the microbrew market too. There's another one where you look at all these little breweries, you go in there and you got, you know, a dozen beers to drink from, and then they've got their pint glasses and their t-shirts and their hats, and it's cool little small places that you can go drop, you know, 20, 30, 50, 100, couple $100. And people love to walk in there and spend time if they're treated well and it looks nice. Absolutely.
Isn't there a great line in Spaceballs?
Merchandising.
Yeah. Merchandising.
Hot shop, the t-shirt.
Alicia, clearly craft brewing is close to your heart. Is this something that you're starting to see in this other industry, mimicking craft brewing and others?
Oh, certainly. I mean, as the industry, I mean, it's certainly growing up. And you see, just in terms of the design alone, you see it's softwood, there's record, there's music playing in the background. It looks like an art gallery, some of the places that I've walked into. And, and it's come a long way. I think it's just it's the natural progression as niche turns to mainstream, everything gets a little bit slicker. And the consumer is as well. The consumer is growing up as well. They're becoming more discerning. And the added competition, you got to step up your game. And you know, we saw that certainly with the evolution of the craft beer industry. Is even now, I mean, there's 4,000 of them. So all of the old guys are redoing their packaging, and some are even redoing some of their recipes as well to try to stand out from the crowd. And so I think it'll be interesting to watch, not just from a dispensary design perspective, but even from a packaging standpoint as well, product packaging.
Absolutely.
What folks will have to do to be able to stand out in the market. But like with anything else, it comes down to the product in the end.
And that packaging part of this conversation is important. I remember being at the launch party last year for Snoop Dogg's brand, Leafs by Snoop. And, you know, there was the big unveil, and Snoop Dogg comes up from the basement and pulls the curtain, and there's the product line, and it's our first look at it. And there was a bunch of journalists and lawyers in this house in the suburbs. But the first thing that stood out was these edibles, these concentrates are packaged in such a way that it was almost new. You know, a lot of people hadn't invested that kind of money, that kind of resources into making this look attractive. You know, so I think it's all a big thing, and it's fascinating how it's filtering into hemp as well. So,
all these new shops show that the industry is growing and obviously making money. Speaking of, cash is still king in cannabis as the banking controversy continues to roll on.
We went deep into the bank talks this summer when Travis Mason, a security guard at a pot shop in Aurora, Colorado, was killed in an attempted robbery. Mason served in the Marine Corps and had been on the job at the dispensary for only 2 weeks.
On the Cannabis Show, we asked if Travis's death could have been avoided.
Former U.S. Marine Travis Mason was killed while pulling a security guard shift last weekend at a pot shop in Aurora. You used to be the police chief in Aurora, and I know Blue Line released a statement right after this happened, but could this aspiring police officer's death, could it have been avoided? Let's talk about that.
Well, I guess, first of all, the way that I want to answer that is I heard John talk a little bit about prior military or law enforcement. We hire, most all of our hirees are from that same branch or that field. And when you look at it from a standpoint of not only is he military, but he was a young father. Yeah. You know, it's just devastating and a travesty, you know, for that family. Could it have been prevented? Possibly. Yeah, you know, I guess I would say that. I mean, I've dealt with these issues over many years, and unfortunately, they happen, right? But I think with some different security, maybe some different training. And when I say different security, maybe some different door buzzers or just methods or procedures that you could sit down and go over step by step. So possibly it could have been, but I can't tell you, you know, 100% that such a travesty could ever have been prevented.
So when something like that happens in this community, I mean, it's still a relatively small community. Is it felt industry-wide throughout the state, even beyond the state?
Well, I think obviously it is, you know, because what's impacted, of course, are our families. And in this case, and all of our employees have families also. So they're concerned. I've taken a lot of calls from wives and girlfriends concerned about their employees. And yeah, it truly is. We've had conversations with many of the other security firms, and this is one of those things, even though we may be a competitor, we're going to come together and we're going to try to work together to ensure that legal businesses like John's are properly protected, and we're still there to serve.
Well, you know, so much of the conversation surrounding Travis Mason's death, you know, is would it have happened if this weren't an industry that dealt primarily in cash with a very valuable product that, you know, fill a bag full of, you know, marijuana product, maybe of all concentrates, that could be a very valuable bag when you walk out of that business if you're robbing them. So, you know, this issue of banking and the lack of banking in the cannabis industry, as well as it being primarily a cash business, we've been hearing about that for years. Is that still an issue from a security perspective? Also, is it as much of an issue now as it was a year ago, 2 years ago?
Oh, those are great questions. I guess I would tell you that yes. I mean, when you look at it, or I guess my terminology from a security standpoint is, when it is a cash business, and sometimes the product, as you were referring to, may be more valuable than the cash itself.
Sure.
So you have two assets that can be a target for the criminal element. But the issue of it being a cash-laden business, of course, that creates all sorts of problems from the standpoint of where do you move it from the store, how do you get it into the system, how do you pay your employees? There are a myriad of issues. But to answer your question, what we've seen over the last couple of years is that there are more and more pioneers, much probably like John Lord, just coming into the industry.
Sure.
There are pioneers in the financial institutions who are stepping out and are saying, these are legitimate businesses. The law has legalized the businesses. Therefore, we're going to try and provide the financial support via banking and so forth.
And you're talking about some of the banks, credit unions that have gone out on those limbs
quietly
quietly and given these businesses.
And I think they still want to remain quiet because we talked about the difference between the state law and the federal law. But there are those pioneers, and they're looking at it also of serving the industry, because after all, it is a legal business.
So it's not as much of an issue now as it was 2 years ago.
Well, I don't want to say that it's lessened dramatically, but what I will say is it is lessening, I think, each and every day, and as we move along. So we're able to work with our business partners and also with those financial institutions to ensure that they're protected, those assets are protected, and hopefully we can assist some of those legitimate businesses into obtaining a financial institution that is acceptable.
Sure.
Now, banking is part of the larger federal impact on the cannabis conversation. The feds have a lot of arms, and each one has at least one finger in marijuana somehow.
Yeah, even the USDA had to make a policy involving marijuana, specifically the organic moniker and how it can be applied to pot.
It can't. It's that easy. But some Colorado hempsters were able to get that label before the ruling came down.
Actually attained something that a lot of people didn't think was necessarily possible.
Sure.
You guys achieved both of your farms full USDA organic certification. Some of the few in the country. But tell us about that process of getting these fields certified organic. I know I've talked with you and some of your colleagues before, and it's pretty a tremendous story.
Yeah. We think of the realm of healing that encompasses this plant. And it all starts in the beginning in your agricultural practices and what you put into the plant. So, once we started, it was a pretty clear choice to us where we wanted to go. CBD Rx is always, in my opinion, we are always, seeking the best that we can for the end product, for the end user. So, when someone wants to farm and have a good sustainable product and good agronomic practices, and then produce something that has a high nutritional value for the end user. Mm-hmm. We wanted to, test the limits and go to the USDA and seek certification for our hemp. And through a lot of team effort and a lot of tedious work, we were able to get there. And it was quite a long process.
And so this is certifying both fields, right? Because you have a field up in Boulder, Longmont, and another one down south?
Yeah, we have our R&D farmers in the Boulder, Longmont area and our big farms down in Pueblo County. And it was quite an eventful process. We had a lady named Natalie, who's our quality assurance officer. She kind of headed that up and really spearheaded that for us, having come from the organic industry herself, and really led the way for us at that point. And the whole process, encompassed several months of hard work, both on the paperwork side and testing, and it really turned out to our benefit. We were, more than happily surprised when the USDA sent us the letter of certification. It was an amazing shock, and it was a triumph for the company. I haven't cried over cannabis in years, but I got teary-eyed just because it was such an accomplishment for us.
Well, and the reason it was such an accomplishment, I mean, many of our viewers know that my colleague and I have done a lot of reporting on pesticides, and one of those little side trips took us to this idea of organic cannabis, and does that exist? And then we got word that the Colorado Attorney General's office was looking into weed companies using the word organic on their signs and their marketing materials, because that doesn't exist. Organic marijuana doesn't exist. So when you guys came along and got this certification along with a handful of other companies in the U.S., that's why it was surprising to you, to us, and there's been some great reporting done on this issue by our colleagues up in KUNC. Props to them. But then something else happened. I know after I initially talked with you guys, my first call was to the USDA. Had a very long and frustrating conversation with them over the course of a couple weeks, when they finally called me back and they had a letter that they were sending to their third-party certifying agencies saying that hemp crops can no longer be certified as organic. You guys got in under this deadline that I think the USDA didn't really know what was going on, but can you tell us about that process? What did you end up hearing back from the USDA after they kind of came back and said, okay, I know you've already done a couple. You've already certified a couple of these farms as organic hemp. Don't do any more. What did you guys hear from USDA at that time?
Yeah, so we were contacted by our certifier and given that same letter that you're mentioning. We see it as a temporary setback for the organic certification of hemp. I don't think that they're ever going to stop. I think the moratorium is justified until they can really put a process in place for certification of this product, of this particular commodity.
Sure.
And I understand why they put the temporary delay on. We are, as a company, moving forward with the USDA and organic certification. So we are, continually updating them weekly with our, farming strategies and everything like that. So we're moving forward with them at this point. and our recertification comes up, I believe, the end of next month. So.
And so nothing, your certification is not in danger. Do I understand that correct?
Yeah, we haven't been told they're revoking us or anything like that. So
and that's what they told me in my reporting as well.
Right, that we're going to get to carry on and proceed farming organic.
The largest federal organization people have been paying attention to this year is the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Oh, the DEA and the scheduling shenanigans. Let's just let Alicia take this one too.
I don't believe it's an overstatement to say that 2016 was a huge year for the cannabis industry at the federal level. Playing a leading role in one of the biggest storylines of the year was the DEA. Last April, we got wind that the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration could make a decision on marijuana rescheduling in a matter of months. If marijuana was rescheduled as something other than a Schedule I substance, the most restrictive level, it would be momentous, industry and policy experts said. They noted potential opportunities such as a boost in research, a solution to tricky banking regulations, and an opening for interstate commerce, among others. Come August, the DEA made public its decision. Marijuana would stay Schedule I. The agency did say it would ease some restrictions for federally approved research. But the DEA wasn't done there. As 2016 drew to a close, the agency filed a federal document that essentially reiterated that all marijuana extracts are still Schedule I substances, including CBD oil. While it wasn't a new rule per se, it caused a commotion in the cannabis industry and raised questions about enforcement. Come August, the DEA made public its decision. Marijuana would stay Schedule I. The agency did say it would ease some restrictions for federally approved research. But the DEA wasn't done there. As 2016 drew to a close, the agency filed a federal document that essentially reiterated that all marijuana extracts are still Schedule I substances, including CBD oil. While it wasn't a new rule per se, it caused a commotion in the cannabis industry and raised questions about enforcement.
It's been quite a year. There is so much more over at thecannabist.co, like recaps on cannabis research over the past year, to the touchy subject of tipping bud tenders, to even dosing your dog with CBD pet treats. I'm really stoked to see what's happening in the months ahead.
Yeah, you know, they aren't slowing down here at the Cannabis at all, or in the cannabis space. I mean, we've had a lot of fun this last year looking back on cultural things. We've dipped into music a little bit. I got to hang out with the likes of Sublime, with Rome, or Willie Nelson. We did our first film. We've seen all of this on the show. We've talked about it, but we are expanding everything, and it is just super fun to be able to take on everybody. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us here on the Clips episode this week. Thanks to Aleta and Alicia, Don over there on the switcher, and Polly on the teleprompter. But most important, thanks to you all for watching and listening to The Cannabis Show and staying up to date on thecannabist.co. My name is producer Vince, and we will be back next week with some rad guests and our interim host Jake Brown, and I will see you there.
I'm allowed to lose, I choose to win, I'm all in, I'm calling any posse you'll be raising at the end. I say it again, ain't afraid to get in, I'll be going for the jackpot with aces in my hand, I'm raw.